Ken Ball with Custom Benefit Consultants here, back again with Boss Moves and Benefits. Going to talk about another subject that's become really a core competency here again at CBC, and that is the resources and processes that we developed over time in support of multi-location clients. So it really is I believe something that's been born out of necessity, but has certainly evolved over time. That has really become something that is very much in our favor, relative to, maybe folks that we would compete with. And it manifests itself in a lot of forms and fashions relative to the resources that we have. So I don't know if, Robin, you want to kind of take that and run with that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think, we like to say we're really good at the messy stuff. So when we talk multi-location, we're talking multi-location. It might be national coffee shops. It might be dental practice companies. It might be restaurants. And so these are entities that have some interesting things happening here. One, they have corporate culture. So often they're large, that we work with. So you have to figure out, benefits and so forth for the C-suite. Then you have these like small entities across the country that may not be, used to big corporate, benefits or processes. And so I think that is really the key. But today we want to focus on processes in general. And Jigel and I can go off forever on how difficult it is for these companies to manage sustainable processes. Our model is managing 100% of the outsourced administration. So that certainly allows us to get our hands on the data at a minimum. And we're getting all the, hours and eligibility information to manage ACA for them also. But I think starting from the top is dependent verification. 100% of our clients, we do 100% dependent verification. I mean, there's no reason that we want to incur additional risk by having dependents that aren't, eligible for the plan on the plan. But it is kind of insidious in these type of things because they might be more mom and pop if it's like a coffee shop, for example, and they want to take care of their employees, or they want, a cousin to be on the plan just because they can and they feel good, and then they're allowing, their employees to have more members on the plan, for example. That happens quite a bit. If we go through a group that has not had dependent verification, we're going to remove a significant amount of dependents on the plan. And some that may or may not have had spec claims, on a self-funded plan, this is kind of a serious endeavor. And then the next layer is how are they managing eligibility in the data? Because all those locations, they don't have HR. They might have HR at corporate, but they don't have HR in that office and may not know all of the rules. And I'm going to throw it to Jigel there just to discuss some of like the systemic issues that we see there with both benefit administration and also leave, right?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a challenge for all large employers with multi-locations, right? Every office, although, you try to sort of mirror your processes down to the local level, doesn't necessarily always happen. And if it happens, it's not consistent. Mm-hmm. Managers change. There's typically a lot of turnover in those areas, right? So what we're finding, and again, because of need, is that because we're receiving hours, we're able to look at hours and see who's working and who's not working, who's consistently working the hours they require to continue on benefits, as well as who may not be working at all, who's on benefits, right? We have some managers that may do favors for their friend or their best friend, and they keep them on benefits, although they may be working part-time. And I mean, it doesn't even cross your mind until you actually see the data, right? So we are able to run these reports, and I mean, we could distribute them however you want to, whether it's to go to a district manager or to go directly to a manager to escalate that. We can definitely run those reports, send them to you on a quarterly basis, or whether it's even monthly. I mean, monthly may be too much of a clip, but maybe every 60 days or every 90 days. But we can run this report and we can send them out and basically let you know who's not working enough hours and who has full-time benefits that shouldn't potentially. So it's definitely, I think, something that happens more often than not. And I think it's definitely a source of loss that and risk, right, that we really need to look at. And I think employers with multi-location inherently have that issue.
A big one is, if they start not to work enough hours and they're still in full-time benefits. And so those smaller locations have to change that status to part-time. A lot of times they don't want to because they don't want to take the benefits away from their employees
Right.
and their friends, and they don't know that that's discriminatory, right? That they
No, yeah,
can't.
I don't think it's malicious in nature. I really think it's just that they think, oh, so and so Mary just got diagnosed with cancer. Let's just keep her on benefits. She's not working. But I mean, that can last months. It can last years, and you forget even that you did that, for somebody, and nobody's calling attention to it. So,
Well, I mean, that's a real example for, one of our clients that the person that was at the small location decided that, her friend had cancer and she did not want, she was past FMLA exhaust and she didn't want to cancel coverage and kept a benefit eligible code status to help her out. What she didn't realize is that that employee also was eligible for Medicaid, also very sick. And so she got declined Medicaid because we were sending the 1095C as an eligible employee.
Right.
And so she got declined. And so what happened is once we found the member, also a spec member, so this is a spec claim now for somebody that should not be on the plan because they were past FMLA exhaust, which we could talk about a long time.
another episode.
And they get to the end of the year, they're also, because they were not eligible at all, not eligible for COBRA. So if they send COBRA to this person now after terminating their benefits, then there's a good chance that the next year of the spec claim, the carrier is going to understand that they're not COBRA eligible based on their leave experience and deny the spec claim, right? So then that creates a lot more liability, for that particular group. So
I agree.
it is a very, very serious thing. The other issue we have is like hour management too in general.
Yeah, just being able to manage your population, right?
Yeah.
So you have a subset of employees and you expect them to work 40 hours a week, and somehow it's not happening and somehow it's allowed. So then again, you've got employees that are working maybe 30 or less than 30 hours a week who have full-blown benefits, including base life and all of the benefits that the company offers, but they're not working the hours to merit that benefit, right? So,
And then what happens if that person has a claim to go?
right. Well, we actually have that happen, right?
Yes.
So we've had employers too that I think that even internally, while this is escalated, they struggle on how to manage it, right? So do you send letters? Do you tell them, hey, Johnny, you need to start working more hours? At what point do you terminate their benefits? So those are things that have to be outlined, and so that we have a process, right? Internally, that you have a process. But we've had people that, in fact, have been working less than 30 hours, and they do file for benefits because they've been paying for them and they have them. But they, once a claim is filed, then obviously, like an STD carrier will want to know how long were you working? When was your last day at work? Same with an LTD carrier. And, we can't validate that. So,
But that goes the other way too, right? So they could be also misclassifying people that are full-time as part-time.
Yeah.
And now they're not making the offer and they're not compliant with ACA.
Agreed.
So, one of the big things that we need to do is make sure that our clients are in compliance. Certainly we want to protect them against claims that shouldn't be paid for people that are not rightfully on the plans, but we also need to make sure that they're meeting their compliance obligations relative to making offers to 95% of the people, et cetera, because they could be setting themselves up for a huge fine if they have, inadvertently, misclassified people
You're right.
that should rightfully be eligible.
Yeah.
I think as long as hours in payroll are solid, we're integrated with Equifax on the back end for 1095C administration. And we do an exceptional job on that. So if we have the hours, we're making the offers, ourselves, not the individual locations, which Ken is right. It's difficult for those small locations to all do ACA eligibility. We do it for them. And I think, that feels like a really strong process. The liability we usually get right now is the other way, where people are status full-time and not working full-time because it's still an ACA issue. It's a FMLA issue. It's a discriminatory issue. All have huge fines and liabilities for the company. If people are paying for life or disability insurance and their past FMLA exhaust, the carriers are not going to pay those claims. So that leaves the company, holding the bag, if you would, because they have benefit statements saying that they're enrolled and they're paying. So it's very difficult for employers to manage that type of liability on the plan.
So we kind of really dove in really fast and went down the path of eligibility management, dependent verification, et cetera, and just the inherent challenge of doing that when you've got a company with dozens, maybe even hundreds of locations, right? And there could be 10 people at a location, there could be 50, but what there is not is a benefits manager or an HR manager or even an HR benefits partner, right? That is engaged and having, responsibility for, for managing all those processes and so forth. And so I think, ultimately what you guys are describing is, to me, a core value prop that we bring, which is kind of being that centralized resource to manage that. And to me, one of the other things that we do that really layers upon that is just that, right? Being that resource. So one of the core things that we've done almost since day one is be the kind of touchstone, the cornerstone for all things, not just benefits administration, but communications, customer service, member service, advocacy. And we do that in lots of different ways. So one of the things that we do is we provide a custom private labeled web location that's a centralized resource for people to go and understand their benefits administration, understand eligibility, which plan are they on, initiate qualifying life events. That's paired with a toll-free number that's completely branded to the client, that we are able to route calls out to all their clients, plans, vendors, et cetera, to concept that Robin had branded as Benefit Phone going back many, many years. So now we're promoting a single toll-free number, a single branded URL, as the resource on behalf of the benefits plan on behalf of human resources. So, and one of the things that I really like about that is, even though there might be 50 locations with five people in a location, they still have that single resource, and they know that there's someone that they can reach out to. And we do that in a manner, and this is one of the lessons that we learned a long time ago, very much so from Costco, is understanding the culture of the client and delivering this product and services in the manner that they would have us do it. And by that, I mean the branded web location follows the marketing guidelines that they give us. Every logo, every color, every font, every piece of content is consistent with the manner in which they would have us do it. Likewise, IVR, phone scripting, the way that we the way that we answer the phone. HTML, emails, text, any other type of outreach is all done so in a manner in which is consistent with client culture and the way that they would have us do that. And I think that also is an intangible. So, you guys are really talking about tangible things, right? Things that we can really quantify. You put a person that was not eligible onto the plan, they incurred $1 million claim. Well, that's pretty darn
that's tangible.
That's
Come on.
tangible. However, having a resource that the person that does not work in the corporate office can call, and it sounds like, feels like, acts like interacting with someone in their HR, and that's us. And I think that's an intangible value that we also provide.
Well, I mean, you mentioned, HTML email templates and text messaging, for those are all templates, and a lot in process automation too. So it's that those individual small locations, they're not doing those communications, so it's consistent with the employer's message. So we have, over 100 communication pieces that we do implement with our clients. And then, sometimes they're very branded and fun, sometimes they're very corporate, just depends on to fit the culture, but they understand exactly what we are doing, what we're communicating to employees at every turn, onboarding, qualifying life events, like Kim was saying, evidence of insurability, dependent verification, qualified medical support orders, all those things have very consistent messaging. So that's not left to those smaller locations to decide how to communicate and have the disparity of communication, within the company itself. So I think that's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that cohesiveness until you said that, but that does make a big difference as well.
Well, I think a lot of that is, I mean, that's where we started, and almost every one of these solutions has been an outgrowth of a request from a client. Our very first contact center was, a CFO that says, why am I answering the phone? You guys answer the phone. And so we kind of took it and ran with it, and as we onboarded Costco and developed our marketplace, the expectation that we would deliver upon the culture that they expect. And then we were able to take those resources, those learning lessons, those processes, and redirect them towards our other enterprise accounts and continue to create value. And I think it's all about continuing to stack those lessons one upon another, and continuously grow and create more value in the offerings that we have.
I agree. So also, Ken, with the weekly and the biweekly calls and monthly calls that we have with our clients, it depends obviously on what we're implementing at any one time. But I think we're open to suggestions. We always ask, what can we be doing? If somebody is let go in a department and that's impacting the people that we work with on a day-to-day basis, we ask them, what is it that they're doing that we could do for you, right? How can we basically replace and be that person for you? So, which leads to where we're at today. All of the changes, all of the shifting that we've done in order to make sure that we stay relevant and that we stay partners.
It also gives us having all those pieces, having our own bin admin system, managing all of those processes, managing all the compliance. It gives us a different picture and different resource structure for those clients. And so often we're learning, where their leave policies are allowing premiums to not be collected. We're learning, what the tendency is to have somebody be on PLOA, for 2 years and working part-time and full-time status. So we start to see trends. We're communicating with them. We're helping them understand, that liability. And to Jill's point, often we can automate a process. If whether it's communications, we can load that into our system and let their managers know if hours are falling short, for example. We do that on the leave side too. But we know a lot more about those clients because we just have so much data. And if they're doing something manually internally, we're like, give it to us, give it to us. We can fix it. We have an awesome development team. And it's why we had our own benefit administration. We don't even care if you're enrolling on a different system. We want to integrate, pull it into our system so we can create those processes, those audits, 1095C. We talked about consolidated billing in a short snip a bit ago, and it's the engine that allows us to do all of that. So instead of having all these locations, now we have a consolidated view of all the data.
Jigel, closing thoughts on the value we provide to multi-location accounts?
Again, I think we think of what you're not thinking about, and we're going to do what you're currently not doing, right?
Don't tell any of our clients that.
Yes. So sometimes we find things that you may not know about, and we kind of highlight it and bring it up to your attention and work with you to see how we can resolve it. So.
Robin?
I think our best attribute is Jigel.
Well said.
She's going to keep them compliant, and she knows the data better than anybody.
Well, thanks for joining Boss Moves and Benefits. Find us where you pick up your favorite podcast.